Hi, my name is Catherine Hazel, and I'm a member of the Nanaimo Climate Action Hub organizing team and your host for this evening. First, let me begin by acknowledging that this meeting is taking place on the unceded traditional territories of the Snuneymuxw, Staminas, and Snaw-Nawas peoples. We will be recording this meeting, but will only post the presentations. If you do not want your image to be recorded, please turn off your video. And now I would like to introduce Natasha Overduin, who will be reading one of her poems to us. Natasha is a poetry student in the Writers Studio program at Simon Fraser University. Her professional experience as a facilitator working on issues of water sustainability, reconciliation, and co-governance between Indigenous and Crown governments provides inspiration for her poetry.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to share a poem. And I'm so sorry that I can't stay for the entire meeting. I actually have my poetry workshops on Tuesdays. So with Zoom, the one benefit is that you can kind of be in two places at once. So I'm so glad that I was invited to share, and I will go ahead and read my poem. Nanaimo Harbor in November. A month of rain falls in a span of days, and the city is sick with beaver fever. Untreated sewage spews into the harbor. Pipes explode, peanut butter, pea soup, beet juice, corn. And I don't think much of it. I walk my retriever along the waterfront, head tucked against the drizzle. Remember the otter I saw here last week. She waddled along the marina, clambered onto a docked boat, casually rummaged the contents of a fishy orange bucket, then slid over the stern with a splash. Now the masts and the rigging clatter. A pair of speedwalkers wade through the fog, prowl the pier like it's a catwalk. Gray bobs bounce, fluorescent rain garb flaps. Without breaking stride, they smile at my retriever. Hope you don't plan on a swim. Back home, on my porcelain throne, I trace shapes with my toes on the bathroom tile. Clams, snails, oysters, fleshy bottom feeders, slick seagrass. The otter wipes her oily whiskers. I flush and I flush and I flush and I flush. Bowl scrubbed white, empty. Forgive me.
Thank you, Natasha. Heather Bates, chair of the Nanaimo Climate Action Hub, will now do a slideshow summarizing our many activities during this first year.
Thank you, Catherine. Just going to share my screen here. And, oops, okay. The slideshow didn't start at the beginning. Try that one more time. Here we go. Yeah, so I just thought it would take, it'll take about 10 minutes or so, and just share with you some of the highlights of the excellent work that has been done by our volunteers over the past basically 1 year, just a little bit over since we started this whole initiative, and that we can all kind of celebrate a little bit, as I think we've really done quite a lot for such a brand new organization. Sorry, just a second, I'm just getting my timer going so I'll know how much time I've got in my talking time here. And a little later on today, we're going to have an exciting keynote by Dr. Jessica Stanley. So I'm looking forward to hearing that as well. So this is where we started, November of 2020. No, that was November of 2020. And we did an afternoon meeting. We had many people from the community in Nanaimo join into that. We had talks from some of our local politicians, Paul Manley, some folks from City Council. We had local activists. We had some artistic presentations as part of that, and it really got us off the ground running, and was an excellent way to bring the community together and find the people who wanted to make this climate hub happen, which it did really jumpstart out of that event. So then our first real campaign was an email campaign. We found out from the city council that there were a couple of key votes that were going to be coming up, and there wasn't a clear sense of exactly which way the votes were going to go. The council was somewhat split, and they wanted funding for a manager of sustainability. They wanted to maximize funding for active transportation infrastructure, for bike lanes, for sidewalks, that kind of thing. And then also a really big one was whether to adopt the donut economics framework for the city's official community plan going forward. And we put out the call, and apparently about 100 people sent emails to city council. And we did hear back from some city councilors that they thought that actually did make quite an impression. And all three of those votes ended up passing by a narrow margin. So it was wonderful that we started off with that kind of success. We then, in January a year ago, held this Building Connections for Local Climate Solutions event, where we invited local groups who have sort of overlapping interests with climate to come and each say a few words about who they are and what they're doing, just so that we could all have more of a sense of what we're all up to and get to know each other in terms of the group. So we actually had 16 different presentations, which was very much a whirlwind. Everybody only got about 3 minutes to speak, and it was really exciting to learn about all the great work that's happening around Nanaimo. We had another email campaign in March of last year, and this one, our city council was working on a resolution just to call on the BC government to follow through on recommendations for the old growth forest. And this one, interestingly, again, we got some feedback from city council. It was a bit contentious where, some in the forestry sort of sector were, not really in favor of this, and we're emailing the city council to say so. They had gotten about 50 emails from people not wanting them to go through with this motion. And then when our Climate Hub mailing list got wind of this, they ended up with about 200 emails in favor of the motion. And again, this motion did pass by somewhat of a narrow margin. I think it was 5-4. So our effort made a difference. We put on a speaker series over the past year, where our aim was to educate ourselves and to help those who are interested to learn more about what are the existing policies locally, what are the best practices, and where do we want to go, so that we could really be well informed going forwards about how we want to do our advocacy work. So we've had quite a few presentations. This one was cycling and infrastructure. We talked about bike infrastructure, bike lanes. We had to have a follow-up Q&A session on that, because there were just so many wonderful discussion points and questions that came. We didn't have time to get to them all in the one presentation. This next one was on walkable neighborhoods. So that's also really key as local climate policy. If we want people to drive their cars less, then we have to make it so that they can live somewhere where they don't need to be driving all the time. That was a great presentation. Next, we had one on solid waste emissions, looking at how we can reduce our emissions from the landfill, and had involvement in all of these from various people who are on staff with the city and with the RDN, as well as other activists and local people and experts along the way. Then we did one on better buildings, so reducing building emissions, looking at how the energy step code works, passive houses, what are the things that we can do to reduce our emissions for our buildings. That's one of the biggest sources of emissions when you look on the local community level. We then did one on car sharing in September, and looking at what would it take to get more expansion of a car sharing system in Nanaimo than what we have now, as that might be something that we could eventually work towards. We also discussed in electric vehicle infrastructure in Nanaimo. Again, where are we at now? where do we need to go? Where are the opportunities? And in terms of how can we, get this up and running and help and support with the expansion of converting to electric vehicles. So that's the presentation series. Also in September, we were really happy to be able to provide some support to local youth who were participating in the global climate strike. So the VIU Eco Club was taking more of the organizing role on this, but we were able to support, with things like being able to receive donations and then disperse that money to reimburse for the costs of the climate strike. And we helped with some promotion and just helped, participated in the organizing of it. And so that was a really nice partnership and a positive event despite the COVID limitations at the time. It was also our first opportunity to do a tabling setup. So we got this nice banner, and unfortunately we didn't think to actually take a photo with those of us who were there and the table. Hindsight is 2020, but this was our table setup, and it was great to have a physical presence somewhere for the first time as we started when it was already a pandemic. So this initiative that we did was the open letter to VIU, where we put together a letter in coordination with students through the VIU Eco Club, as well as people in the faculty at VIU, and really asking for some concrete actions that the community is asking for VIU to take in order to really meaningfully address the climate emergency. And we had more than 135 people, as well as 15 different organizations signed on to that letter, and that included the VIU Faculty Association and the Student Union. So we're hopeful that there may still be some things coming out of that we haven't fully seen yet. In addition, we've had several meetings with local MLAs. So we met with Sheila Malcolmson, we met with Doug Routley, and we actually met with Sheila Malcolmson a second time to advocate for better climate policy. And we're in the process of scheduling another meeting with Doug Routley right now. So we're working to connect not just with our local politicians, but also where we can with politicians at other levels in our local area. The most recent campaign, many of you probably have seen, this was when we had a by-election for the school trustee position. The person's not going to be in their spot for all that long, but it was a good practice round for the municipal elections coming up in the fall, where we did send a set of questions to both of the candidates for this position. And they both gave us responses, and we were able to distribute those so that our interested readers who want to vote with climate in mind would have more information to go on in terms of who they want to choose as their climate champion in the school district. So this last one on here is an initiative called Community Climate Circles. And this is somewhat of a separate project from the Climate Hub, but it's under our umbrella. So the Community Climate Circles is working to figure out how can we engage more people in our local community to get them on board with doing what they can to reduce their own personal emissions. So we're trying out different systems of trying to get people together to have a meeting in a circle, and whether that's facilitated by kind of an expert person or just somebody who's a volunteer, and help educate people and help them learn what is the stuff they can do that has the most impact. And this initiative has gotten more than $10,000 worth of grant funding so far, even though we're sort of less than a year old. So that's really exciting, and we'll be interested to see where that one goes. Oh yeah, I put that in here as well. These are our partnerships, which is one of the things I'm really most proud of, is how many local groups are really on board with the importance of the climate crisis and wanting to participate and join together to do what we can. So we've got 8 partner groups here, and then the ones on the right are groups that we are members of ourselves. So that's the BC Climate Alliance and the West Coast Climate Action Network, which we are now part of as well. In addition, we have been able to put out monthly newsletters for the last, I'd say, 6 months or more, where we're able to distribute information about what we've been up to as a hub, also what our partner organizations are up to, letting people know about upcoming events and opportunities where they can do some advocacy. So that's been great to have one of our volunteers taking that on and putting that out every month as well. Okay, and then we're getting to the next portion, which I think Catherine is going to talk about, and I'll put up the slide when you want.
Okay. Yeah, some of you may recall that there was a survey sent out asking you to rank what initiatives we should undertake in 2022. And ta-da, we have the results. show the slide and I will interpret. Okay, when you look at this, the ones that have the least amount of other colored stuff on the right-hand side are the ones that are the top. So to explain, the top 5 were supporting climate champion candidates for the municipal election, and some of us have already started work on that, and we're meeting and doing research and lining up people for a series of webinars we're going to have in advance of the election. We want to lobby to empower municipalities to take stronger action on climate through changes to the community charter. And to encourage Nanaimo to shift investments away from fossil fuels, support a youth global climate strike as we did last year, and maybe help to make it an even bigger event. Have a week-long transit ride challenge, for example, and call it Go by Bus. We now have Go by Bike. How about having Go by Bus as well? Post signs around the region with the times to popular destinations by bicycle or walking. You'll have seen signs downtown in Nanaimo that sort of do that, but they put it in meters, which is not that helpful. I've been in other cities, for example, like Glasgow in Scotland, where they give you how long it takes you to get to somewhere, or in Vancouver, where they give you how long it takes you to walk there, and that's much more helpful. So we'd like to see that in Nanaimo. And then having composting more readily available for multi-unit residential buildings, and as well as restaurants. Have a workshop on guiding people to change their mindset on fossil fuels and climate change. Encouraging the city of Nanaimo to sign up to the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. Maybe have monthly letter writing parties to the news editors or to elected officials. Encourage a collaboration between the city and regional district and VIU to teach tradespeople top-level step code. And this one is a real big favorite of mine, and I was so sad when I saw it got to the bottom of the list. But anyway, it's anti-idling campaign, and the idea was we'd make little business cards with the reasons why you shouldn't be idling your car, and then we could just nicely hand it to people who are doing that, and maybe educate them on the emissions that result from that. And then finally, a campaign for reduction of unwanted junk mail, such as informing people how to cancel it and other things. So as I said, we're already tackling some of those initiatives, and we'll certainly be taking a look at the others throughout the year. Okay, now we're getting on to, well, I shouldn't say the best part of the evening, but certainly a wonderful part of the evening. And that's the presentation or the speech by Jessica Stanley. And just to give you a little bit of background about her, in case you didn't know, she's a school trustee for the Nanaimo Ladysmith Public Schools. She has a PhD in clinical psychology from Simon Fraser University and has been a lifelong advocate for the environment. She is currently chair of the Environmental Stewardship and Sustainability Advisory Committee for the school district and a member of the Standing Committee on the Environment and Economy for the NDP. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Even that you temporarily considered me the best. I feel warm and fuzzy about that. Just going to share my screen here. See if this works. Okay. That seems to be up on the screen. Can everyone see that? Great. Thank you very much. Okay. Well, first off, I'd like to thank Heather and all the organizers and all the members actually for all the important climate work that you do and for inviting me to speak tonight. This talk allows me to continue a discussion from a previous talk that I gave at VIU about a month ago. And there'll be a little bit of overlap, but I will take this talk farther into the cultural underpinnings that limit our ability to face the reality of climate change. So it's generally accepted that climate change is real and human caused. And many of us who have faced this reality find it difficult to understand why we see little change in people's behavior and why it seems that our governments are not responding sufficiently to the climate change crisis that we face. And I'm often asked to comment as to why it is that despite the fact that people are experiencing increasingly severe weather events and seeing other signs around us, like the dying cedar, that they don't seem to understand that our climate is undergoing dramatic change and that we need to change our behaviors accordingly. In this talk, I'm going to explore some factors that seem to limit our ability to face the reality of climate change, talk about some of the work that we are doing at Nanaimo Ladysmith Public Schools, and how we can move past this veiled state of limbo that we seem to be in. So first, let's take a bit of look at an information that is around us that influences our behavior. In BC in 2021, January kicked off the year with an atmospheric weather bomb. In June, we experienced the heat dome, and the small town of Lytton set a new national high of 49.6 degrees Celsius. The heat dome was our first mass casualty climate change related event, with 565 people dying of heat-related causes. More than 1 billion seashore animals may have cooked to death in BC's heat wave. And on June 30th, Lytton was incinerated. In 2021, more than 1,600 wildfires burned nearly 8,700 square kilometers, making it the third worst year on record. On November 6th, we had a waterspout and a tornado near UBC. And a week later, an atmospheric river triggered flooding and mudslides that destroyed major roads in BC and resulted in over 600,000 farm animal deaths. Costs of this event alone are estimated between 450 million and 7.5 billion. End of year extreme frigid temperatures broke records across the province, and the variance of temperatures this year in BC was over 90 degrees in difference, ranging from +50 to just over -40. We started off 2020 with a weather storm and king tide interaction that destroyed infrastructure, including the seawall in Qualicum and in Stanley Park. And all of these are examples of how climate change interacts with weather to increase the severity and frequency of extreme weather events. We are experiencing extreme weather that is outside of our normal experience. And these unusual and stressful experiences leave us with a sense of uncertainty. And it's important to note that we are social creatures. We organize ourselves in groups. We're in a group now. We value and we need our social connections. We look to others for cues and guidance, especially in times of uncertainty. So with all these extreme weather events, we look around to others to see how they're reacting. And yes, some are shocked, and yes, some are aware of the connection to climate change, but we don't see people changing their behavior. That information influences our behaviors. And as social animals that are gifted with language, we talk to each other about our experiences, and that language reflects our thought processes. So the language that we use about our emotional reactions to the climate crisis is typically the words eco-anxiety. And I want to unpack these words. Temporary experiences of anxiety in response to stressful events is considered normal and even helpful when it motivates you to prepare for a task. However, when anxiety is long-term, increasing in severity, or interferes with daily living, we consider that pathological and diagnose mental illness. Oftentimes when people talk about anxiety, the underlying assumption is that the emotional experience is disproportionate to the actual issue. So the underlying or the emotional reaction is viewed as irrational. And emotions are our internal communication mechanism that help us better understand situations. They offer immediate information that allow us to evaluate and respond. Anxiety is our internal alarm system that increases our awareness and improves our likelihood of responding to a perceived threat. So emotions cannot be understood without understanding what triggers them. And so we need to look at the context. And let me remind you of the context, right? So, what is a reasonable reaction to this? I struggle, and some of you know I've had conversations with you about this. I really struggle with the term eco-anxiety. And that's because of the assumption associated with the word anxiety that one is overreacting. And I want to make it abundantly clear that anxiety in our current environment is a reasonable response to an unreasonable situation. Having fear, grief, worry, shame, hope, or despair, or all of those in varying degrees at various times in response to our climate crisis and the destruction that we've experienced in our own province and that we can see across the world, is not indicative of a mental disorder. And rather, it's a sign that you've not disconnected from your internal emotional cues to what is happening around you. Now, if you find yourself unable to function on a daily basis, then that's when some support is needed. But to be clear, your internal emotional response is a valuable source of information. And it can sometimes be confusing when your internal information does not match what you see externally. And that requires, in those situations, critical thinking skills. So what information do we have? We're experiencing abnormal and extreme weather events. We don't see people changing their behavior. And our language may inaccurately imply overreaction, when what is actually happening is an underreaction. We also need to note what we observe from our leaders. We, social animals, have organized ourselves into systems with leaders, and it's their job to keep us safe, and we entrust them to guide our behavior. So what do we see from our leaders? Well, the president of France told us that we're killing our planet. The UN Secretary General told us that it's, quote, code red for humanity, and that billions of people are at imminent risk. Words like crisis and emergency are used by scientists and world leaders to describe our current risk levels. And locally, both the city of Nanaimo and the school board declared climate emergencies early in this term. But at the United Nations Climate Change Convention, COP26, the agreed upon commitments made by world leaders of participating countries will have the effect of keeping global warming to only 2.4 degrees Celsius. But that's only if countries fulfill their commitments made at COP, which they have not historically done well, and only if yet to be technology develops as expected. And 2.4 degrees is much higher than scientists are telling us is safe. World leaders have repeatedly failed to take action required that is necessary to address climate change. In Canada, federally, despite various commitments and promises to lower greenhouse gas emissions, our greenhouse gas emissions increased from 707 megatons in 2016 to 730 megatons in 2019. In BC, our government has an award-winning climate change action plan that is the best in Canada, but its targets are not science-based, and they're not sufficient to keep global warming to 1.5 degrees. And BC's greenhouse gas emissions have increased by 2% since 2007. So, I am grateful our government is heading in the right direction and they are leaders. And I will advocate for them to do better by setting science-based targets. So what we see in the Cedars and what we experience in our environment and what the science is telling us is inconsistent with our government's actions and what we see in the behavior of others and even in our own behaviors. It seems that facing the reality of the responsibility to address climate change is challenging both at a personal and at a systems level. Sally Weintraub roots this inconsistency in our tendency towards exceptionalism, found both in our personal beliefs and in cultural dynamics. Exceptionalism is seeing ourselves and our group as better than other. And because we believe ourselves to be exceptional, we believe that we're entitled to special treatment and that we should be able to avoid facing consequences of that special status. And this tendency can be found in all of us to varying degrees. And it's that aspect of us that views our privilege, our convenience, and our pleasure as more important than caring for other. Unfettered resource extraction is an excellent example. So we can see our species as exceptional. We can see our country or our beliefs or our way of life as exceptional. And we've seen this throughout history. We can use this tendency to elevate our uniqueness to justify our behaviors that we know or should know have negative consequences. We may not be consciously aware of exceptional thinking, but it is in our actions. So for example, I can feel that I've had a very hard week and I deserve that lovely bottle of wine with its massive carbon footprint from being flown halfway across the world. You see, I want that wine. It's tasty. And I did work hard. And my exceptionalism justifies my self-serving side and devalues my socially responsible side. So sorry, I don't mean to take those pleasures away from us, but we do have to wonder how it is that good, kind, caring, and informed people can see the ravages of climate change in Haiti and Puerto Rico and have a town in our own province incinerated this summer and still continue to act as if normal. These images have not led us to change our personal behavior to address climate change. We still want our kiwi from Peru, we want our wine from Australia, and we want our cheap clothes from Indonesia. And we usually make these choices without reflecting upon the impact on our environment and those currently at risk from climate change. Weintraub uses the term bubbles to understand how it is that the majority of people have collectively retreated from the reality of the climate crisis to a fake world that sanitizes the impacts of the climate crisis and removes our responsibility to take care of the earth and others. The climate bubble is a collective psychological state that provides us with a prettified world that minimizes our moral unease and buffers us from a series of shocks related to climate change. We're motivated to participate in bubbles without consciously buying into the story because they allow us to pursue a privileged lifestyle while ignoring costs. We're also motivated to avoid facing the distress associated with the reality of climate change. Weintraub views the climate bubble as a tool that supports our tendency to view ourselves as exceptional. The bubbles allow us to have too little anxiety. We don't have to make those hard decisions or give up that bottle of wine if we just allow the consequences of our actions to slip out of our awareness. The climate bubble exists in the context of our neoliberal culture that prioritizes maximizing individual entitlement and corporate profits over caring for one another and taking responsibility for our planet. And Weintraub refers to this as the culture of uncare. So in order to maintain neoliberal political and economic ideology and the attitude of personal exceptionalism, our culture needs to develop a set of beliefs that prioritizes our privilege and our lifestyle and our entitlement over notions of justice and care. So more attention is paid to keeping up with the Joneses over issues like homelessness and poverty. We don't tend to question, how is it that we can have excessive resources when other people don't have their basic needs met? Independence is valued more than interdependence. We focus on our investment funds instead of the next 7 generations. And personal happiness and personal achievement is a priority. Our exceptionalism tells us that we're special. And because of that special status, we don't have to face consequences. Our climate bubbles sanitize our world, so we're less likely to see the reality of climate change and those consequences. And our culture of uncare tells us that we live in a just world that values personal success more than collective well-being, all combining to relieve ourselves of any personal responsibility for the environment. And although corporate slogans tell us of our perfect world and that we can have it all, we are starting to see cracks in the bubbles. Extreme weather events have weakened our bubbles. Nearly daily news of environmental crises is countering the collective silence about the reality of climate change. We're starting to talk about it in more than just superficial ways. Okay? We're mentioning events in a more deep way, but the acceptance of the reality of our responsibility is one step further that we seem reluctant to take. It seems that youth are less likely to exist in the sanitized world of the climate bubbles, and perhaps it's because their future is at risk. Youth are leaders in the climate movement and have been pushing for change. In a survey that explored the thoughts and feelings of over 10,000 youth in 10 countries across the world, 95% expressed some worry, with 60% saying they're extremely or very worried. And I'll tell you, when I was printing up this slide, my son was with me and he put himself in the worried category, and he's 9. 77% said the future is frightening. In all countries, youth reported a negative perception of their government's response to climate change, with only 30% feeling that their government can be trusted to address climate change. The majority of youth thought their governments were failing them, dismissing their concerns, and lying about the actions they have taken. And notably, youth from countries that are already experiencing greater threats of the climate crisis reported higher levels of negative emotions and a greater sense of betrayal by their government. They don't have the luxury of climate bubbles. Locally, students in Nanaimo Ladysmith Public Schools were loud and clear about the desire for climate action, and I really believe that their efforts help motivate some of the changes in our district. The Board of Education of Nanaimo Ladysmith Public Schools declared a climate emergency and created an environmental stewardship policy. And this policy integrates environmental considerations and sustainable practices into every administrative, capital planning, and programming decision we make. Everything we do from here on out must consider the lens of the environment. And the intent was to make a cultural shift in the entire district. We've also started an environmental stewardship and sustainability advisory committee to create an action plan for the district. And we hope to achieve this within our last year of the term. And this is policy in action. Turning the direction of a large system is not normally easy, but I will say that the response in the school district was surprising. And maybe that's because we work with youth, and youth have been trying to shake those who hold positions of power into action for years. Whatever it was like the most of the people in the district were waiting for this policy. Maybe it gave them hope. Finally, they had a way to take action. Finally, they had a system that was going in the direction that they wanted. We saw this policy ignite excitement and desire for an action, but there was also a huge sense of relief among people who were aware of the climate crisis. So although system change is hard, once the system recognized the climate emergency, and once we entrenched policy into action and action into the policy, there seemed little resistance to the changes. A core precursor to this work in our district was some of the work that the district had done on reconciliation. So 3 years ago, the Nanaimo Ladysmith Board of Education adopted the Sayetsis reconciliation framework. Sayetsis is a Hulkaminam expression, meaning walking in two worlds. It guides us to include traditional Indigenous knowledge into our contemporary worldview and into the work that we do at the district. And I'm going to speak from my own experience and my own growth in understanding this framework, rather than be a white person attempting to communicate Indigenous knowledge when that would be more appropriate to hear from an Indigenous knowledge keeper. So Sayetsis asks us to be open to the teachings of the land and the water, and to understand that we are all related to one another and to all living species who share the land and waters with us. It highlights our interconnectedness to the land and our responsibility to honor the land, as it is the land and the waters that provide for us. And although I can say these words, I have trouble expressing the depth to which my understanding of those words have grown. I came to this district as someone very rooted in the scientific model, and I still am, but I do feel like my awareness of knowledge has expanded because I was asked to listen in a different way. What I became aware of is that the exceptionalism that is prevalent among Western culture contrasts significantly with an Indigenous worldview, particularly in how we relate to the environment. So exceptionalism emphasizes our independence, where an Indigenous perspective is not only that we are interdependent, but that we are all related. Exceptionalism fosters the belief that we are superior, whereas an Indigenous perspective literally roots us to the land and emphasizes how we are connected to the land and reliant upon it. Exceptionalism prioritizes our individual happiness, whereas an Indigenous view highlights our responsibility to care for the land with the perspective of considering future generations. And exceptionalism focuses on receiving things and accumulation, whereas an Indigenous perspective has notions of reciprocity as foundational views. So these perspectives obviously sharply contrast one another in their approach to the world. If I am superior, then what can I possibly learn from the trees? How can there be information in the dying cedar or arbutus? If I am superior, then I am separate and can stand on my own, and I do not need a support system. If I am superior, then others like me are better, and we would not benefit from diversity. And if my special status means that I should only focus on me and those like me, then I do not have a responsibility for others or for future generations or for this earth. And if my special status means that I can take what pleases me, then I don't have limits on what I can take. But science is verifying what Indigenous knowledge has been trying to tell us. All the species on land and in the water interact and impact one another. Ecosystems involve complex and interdependent relationships among a variety of species, and their strength is often found in their diversity and interconnectedness. We are stronger and healthier when we rely on one another rather than when we dominate and overtax our resources. if we are willing to walk in the forest and observe, those lessons are right there. So where do we go from here? Go for a walk. The dying cedars are trying to tell us something. Be willing to listen in a different way. Observe what we can learn from the land and the waters. And I also mean, be willing to listen to yourself, right? What is your relationship to the news about climate change? As one of my very insightful friends once asked me, what is your relationship to the news about climate change? How do you feel in response to the climate crisis? How do you feel when you're among the trees? Be more conscious. I am asking you to step outside of your bubble. What is the impact of your purchases and your actions? What other choices can you make? What is the impact of your choices on your grandchildren's grandchildren? And please know that the changes that you make in your actions are observed by others. And we need more people to be the change, because that has a cumulative effect. Share your experiences. Share your emotional reaction to weather events. Share your concerns about the climate crisis. Show others your reasonable emotional reaction to the reality of the climate crisis. Talk about your garden and the food you grow. Talk about riding your bike or your heat pump or your sustainable choices. Climate bubbles are sustained by silence. And finding others who share your concerns and who want to take actions, however small they might be, is very important in helping you cope with the reality of the climate crisis and in helping us move forward. So in closing, let me ask you, which one of these are you willing to do? Thank you. I think we're opening up to questions, but I'm going to let someone let me know if there are any questions there.
Okay, well, thank you for a fabulous, wonderful talk. That was just terrific. And people, if you would like to ask some questions, if you could type them into the chat and we can read them out, that would be great. I don't know if there's any other method we can use in Zoom, but anyway, if you have any questions, that would be great. Everyone's stunned.
I can give people time by asking a question that I know someone has. Joel has often talked about the school district and a policy that we have currently that in my perspective is outdated about active transportation and use of active transportation. And he's often challenged me about when are we going to do something about this and how are we going to do something about this. And so I saw that he was on here. He's someone with a Go By bike, and I wanted to let him know, because I thought he would be asking, that I really believe that we would be making this change during the as part of the environmental action plan. But I will tell you that I do feel like maybe that's something that, because the climate action plan will be a year long, that I think that I'm gonna try to incorporate some policy reviews in between the time. So Joel, that one's for you, because you've been motivating and pushing for climate action in the school district for a long time, and I felt like I actually owe that to you.
What were some of the specific things that Joel was asking for? I mean, I can guess, but it would be good to know.
Yeah. Well, There was, he was very specific in the sense that there was, or is, an administrative procedure that limits using active transportation, so like riding your bike, between locations when you're at work. And it cites a work safe policy that is no longer in existence, or at least it does not exist. I couldn't find it. And so not only does the administrative procedure seem out of date from that perspective, but it also is out of date from our policy perspective about encouraging active transportation. So it was very specific about he's hoping to change something that will encourage or at least allow our staff to use active transportation between locations. I hope I did you justice there.
Okay, here's one from Francis. Why is the NDP dug in on allowing more old growth to be cut because of, is it because of existing contracts? And why are they dug in on LNG? And why have they no will to encourage offshore wind or solar instead?
Yeah, fair questions that I cannot answer. I do not answer for the NDP. I am a member, and I am a member of our climate action group. Well, no, not climate action group, sorry. It's called the Standing Committee on Environment Economy, and we're supposed to be able to provide information or perspectives and even perspectives on policy to the party. And this group has been very active and has voiced support for Wet'suwet'en, concern about LNG, put forward motions about opposing any further infrastructure with regards to fossil fuels, subsidies of fossil fuels, moratoriums on old growth, cutting of old growth. I can tell you personally where I stand on those things, and that I'm not alone on that within the party. But the reality is that there's a number of perspectives within the party, and I don't get to make those decisions. I wish I could.
Yeah, okay. I feel your pain because I'm in the Green Party, and although they support all those things, on the other hand, there's many of us in the Green Party who would like our MLAs to stand up every day and say something about the climate emergency, and they're saying, yeah, but there's housing and there's all these other things that are happening. I have a question from Shelley Sarabin, sorry. Could you give some examples of what is in the climate action plan?
We haven't written it yet.
Oh, okay.
So no, I can't. But
we're asking you all these tough questions.
No, I love tough questions. That's fine. It helps me be better in my work when I have to, answer these questions. So we're actually just currently in the process of writing the work plan for the work plan, meaning we're setting out the time frame and the process that we're going to go through to create the climate action plan, or environmental stewardship action plan, and the timeline that we hope to have it passed in. And I will tell you, it's kind of timeline wise is a bit ridiculously ambitious, but everybody has signed on for that because we know that as far as this board, we have 1 year left. Same with city council. They have 1 year left to get something done in this term. So we are, I'm sure that the farm will be included in that. We're developing a farm at one of our schools. I'm sure that we're going to continue working on zero waste. I know that we have established science-based GHG emission reduction targets. I'm going to assume that's going to be in there. We don't get to dictate, but that's some things that I'm pretty confident will be in there.
Okay. And here's a question from Brian Short. As you are on the school board, I sometimes find there is a disconnect between what I hear from youth and what I see at the schools. So much space is given to student parking, and the biggest traffic jam of the day is usually at the school. Can that be addressed in the action plan?
Yeah. And so I hope so. It is I think it's going to be addressed, or we're going to attempt to address it in a number of ways. And it's also through the, what escapes me, the facilities plan. So the long range facilities plan. We're two committees that are going to be working together on an active transportation plan that is going to be looking at this as much as possible. But the reality is a lot of those aspects are determined by municipalities and cities. And so I know that we're going to be working as much as possible with the city of Nanaimo and the city of Ladysmith, and hopefully with the RDN. But you know, that's one aspect of it, that we can try to create structures and policies that will encourage people to take active transportation, but changing behavior in that regard, people and their cars, that's a hard one. So the school district, that is embedded in two of their plans, but you know, I acknowledge that that's going to be a complex one.
Yeah. Okay, and then a question from Shelley. When is the vote on the action plan? Can citizens attend the meeting? I assume it will be on Zoom.
We're on Teams actually, but so the vote, we've already voted to do it.
Okay.
Now what's going to happen is actually in 2 days, I'm going to the committee and I'm bringing forward the action plan, the work plan, I should say. And then that's going to go to the board just for approval, but that's just a plan on how to do it. There will be consultations along the way with regards to like partner groups in our school district. I think what Shelley's asking is like the vote of it in the end, and maybe how to support it if they feel that it's acceptable. That is looking like September, I think. So the goal is to create the plan and get it out for consultation sometime July-ish. And that goes out to the public and anyone can provide feedback. And then we're going to take that feedback, consider that feedback, and incorporate it in whatever way that the committee can. And then it'll go to the board probably in September. That's our goal.
Okay. We have time for, I think, one more question, and this is from Jenna Zimansky. I know some schools have been trialing more sustainable zero waste practices, for example, composting, collection of different types of recycling. Will this be expanded to more schools soon, or is this up to individual schools to implement?
I hope it's expanding to more schools. It's an amazing program. This is about a relationship that we have with the RDN. So we're able to do this because the RDN partnered with us and has helped fund us in doing this. And so Ben Giselbrecht has been very active in that. It's not up to individual schools. I believe the school district's supportive of it, and it will be part of the action plan. But it's with the RDN, but it doesn't have to just stay at the RDN. You can also talk to the city of Nanaimo, and you can also talk to the city of Ladysmith. So this is one thing that this group can do, is encourage the municipalities to engage in relationships with the school district that support us in offering zero waste programs in our schools, because they're the ones that manage the waste. And so that's the relationship there.
Okay. We'll add that to our list of initiatives for this year. Well, thank you very much. This has been, a fascinating discussion and an excellent talk. And so I'm going to sadly have to wrap this up. I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight and for your participation. Watch for our newsletter and email us if you're interested in getting more involved. As Dr. Courtney Howard, president of the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, says, action is better than anxiety.